The city of Leora stood tall in the middle of green valleys and shining rivers. Its walls were made of stone, smooth and strong, built long ago by hands that wanted to keep danger away. People lived simple lives, farming the fields, trading in the markets, and gathering in the wide square during festivals. Children ran through narrow streets, laughing and playing, while the elders told old tales under the shade of great trees. Among the people of Leora lived a young man named Aaron. He was known for his quiet strength and his habit of asking questions that others did not bother to ask. His sister, Mira, was quick in mind and gentle in heart. The two of them often went to the stone temple on the edge of the city. The temple was old, much older than the walls or the houses. It carried the marks of ancestors who had lived in an age almost forgotten. The temple walls were covered with carvings, lines and shapes telling stories in silence. Aaron often traced his fingers over the carvings, feeling the rough edges where human figures stood with weapons of light in their hands. Beside them were beasts carved in strange forms. Some had wings like storms, some had claws like iron, and some had eyes that seemed alive even in stone. Aaron asked Mira what she thought the carvings meant. She answered that they were warnings from the past. The ancestors had fought these beasts once, and they wanted the future generations never to forget. But most of the people no longer believed in such things. They thought the beasts were only symbols of fear, carved to teach lessons of courage. The elders often said, "The ancestors faced many dangers, but now the world is safe." Life in Leora was peaceful, and it was easy to think the old tales were only dreams of the past. Still, Aaron was not convinced. He would sit by the river at night and watch the sky. Sometimes he thought he saw faint movements among the stars, as if shadows were crossing the heavens. He told Myra of these thoughts, and she listened carefully. Unlike the others, she did not laugh at his doubts. She believed that if the ancestors carved these beasts in stone, then they must have been real. And if they were real once, there was a chance they could return. One evening, the city gathered for the summer festival. Fires were lit in the square. Music echoed from drums, and dancers moved in circles while children cheered. Aaron stood near the edge of the crowd, his eyes lifted to the night sky. The stars shone bright, but one cluster seemed strange. The lights did not twinkle like stars. Instead, they moved slowly, almost like they were alive. He said nothing, not wanting to spoil the joy around him, but his heart grew uneasy. Later that night, when the festival ended, Aaron and Mira walked home together. Mira spoke about the song she enjoyed, but she noticed that her brother's thoughts were elsewhere. She asked him what was wrong. Aaron pointed toward the hills beyond the river. The trees there stood like a black wall in the moonlight, but among them something seemed broken. Even from far away, Mira could see gaps where the forest should have been whole. She grew silent. The next day, Aaron left the city early with a group of workers who went to cut wood from the forest. As they reached the valley, they saw strange signs. Large branches had been torn down. Trees had been split in half, as if something heavy had passed through. The ground was marked with deep prints that did not match the feet of any known animal. The workers whispered among themselves. Some said it was the work of storms. Others said it was the work of giants. Aaron bent low and touched the prints. The shape was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was long, sharp at one end, and wide at the other, almost like claws. He felt a shiver move through him. His mind returned to the carvings on the temple walls. The prints on the ground looked very much like those marks beside the figures of the beasts. He stood and told the others, but most of them shook their heads. They said it was foolish to compare carvings with real ground. They returned to their work, cutting wood as always, though with unease in their eyes. When Aaron returned to Leora, he found Myra waiting. He told her what he had seen. She grew pale but not surprised. She said the old temple had prepared her heart for this truth. The ancestors carved their warnings for a reason, and now the signs were showing. She told Aaron that they must watch carefully, for the city would not believe them easily. As the sun set that evening, the city of Liara once again filled with the sounds of daily life. Merchants closed their shops, children hurried home, and fires burned softly in the courtyards. Yet above all this calm, the sky seemed heavier. A low sound, like distant thunder, rolled across the horizon, though no clouds were there. People ignored it, calling it tricks of the wind. But Aaron and Mira listened closely, their hearts beating faster. The ancestors had carved their warnings in stone. And soon the people of Liara would learn that those warnings were not just stories. The next morning, Liara woke under a sky of bright blue. The city seemed peaceful, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. Farmers left the gates with their tools, traders called out prices in the markets, and children carried water jars from the river. To most people, it was just another ordinary day. Yet to Aaron and Mira, the world did not feel the same. The strange sound of thunder without clouds and the broken trees in the valley remained heavy in their minds. Aaron tried to tell his neighbors what he had seen. He spoke of the claw-like marks on the ground and the trees split apart as if by something huge, but the men only laughed, saying storms had always been rough on the valley. One elder even placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You are young, Aaron. Do not let shadows fool you. Our city has been safe for many generations." Mira, however, did not laugh. She walked with Aaron to the temple once again. The two of them stood before the carvings of the beasts. In the early morning light, the stone figures seemed almost alive. The wide wings, the sharp claws, and the glowing eyes etched into rock looked like warnings carved in fire. Mira whispered, "If the signs are returning, we must be ready." Later that evening, as the sun went down, strange roars echoed faintly from the distant hills. The sound carried across the river, so low and deep that it made the ground tremble. Dogs in the city barked wildly, and animals in the fields rushed to their pens. People gathered in the square, asking one another what they had heard. Some said it was just the call of large birds. Others said it was only wind rushing through the canyons. But Aaron looked at Mira, and she looked back at him, both knowing the truth. That night, Aaron stayed awake by the window of his small house. The stars filled the sky, but once again, he noticed movements among them. The same cluster of lights from before shifted, as if they were not stars at all, but living things moving slowly above. He tried to count them, but they blended together, glowing and fading in strange patterns. His chest grew heavy with unease. In the following days, more signs appeared. Farmers who went far into the valley returned with tales of giant shapes moving between the trees. They spoke of broken rocks, crushed grasslands, and holes in the ground large enough to hide a wagon. Still, the leaders of Liara dismissed these reports. The council said, "We cannot frighten the people with wild tales. Our walls are strong. Nothing can harm us." But the fear was growing. Children no longer played freely near the gates. Traders whispered to one another as they packed their goods earlier than usual. Even the guards on the wall grew restless, often glancing at the sky as though expecting something to appear. One afternoon, while Aaron and Myra were walking along the riverbank, they saw something strange in the water. At first, it looked like driftwood floating downstream, but as it neared, they saw it was no wood at all. It was a scale, wide as a shield, shining faintly with strange light. Mira picked it up carefully. Its surface was hard, harder than any stone, and it glimmered with colors that changed when turned toward the sun. Aaron remembered the carvings once again. Many of the beasts shown on the temple walls had scales drawn across their bodies. This piece lying in Mira's hands, seemed to prove that the creatures were no longer just stories. That evening, Aaron brought the scale to the council. He stood before the leaders and showed them what he and Myra had found. But instead of listening, the council shook their heads. One man said, "This is only a stone washed smooth by the river. You let fear twist your mind." Another added, "Do not stir the city with your strange talk. There is no need for panic." Aaron wanted to argue, but Mira touched his arm, asking him to remain calm. She knew the council would not believe until they saw the truth with their own eyes. As they left the hall, Mira said quietly, "The ancestors faced the same. At first, no one believed them. Only when the beasts stood at their gates did the people understand." That night, the sky over Leora changed. A red glow appeared near the horizon, faint at first but growing stronger as hours passed. People gathered on rooftops and in the square to look at it. Some said it was fire from a faraway mountain. Others said it was the light of stars falling. But Aaron and Mira knew it was something else. The red glow pulsed like a heartbeat, and with it came the same deep roar they had heard before. The city grew uneasy. Mothers held their children close, and guards tightened their grip on their spears. The council still told the people not to worry, but whispers spread through the crowd. Everyone could feel it now. Something was coming, something old and powerful, something the ancestors had known. Aaron and Mira returned home, their thoughts heavy. The temple carvings no longer felt like distant stories. They were warnings written in stone, warnings that were now alive in the air, the ground, and the sky above. The first signs had arrived, and soon, no one in Leora would be able to ignore them. The red glow in the horizon did not fade with the coming of morning. Instead, it grew brighter, spreading across the sky like a silent fire. People of Leora woke to see the strange light and filled the streets with uneasy voices. Children cried. Animals refused to move, and even the strongest men felt fear tighten in their chests. The council ordered calm, but their words no longer carried the same strength. Everyone had heard the roars in the night, and everyone had seen the sky. Aaron and Mira stood at the gates with many others. From the walls, the guards kept looking toward the hills, their eyes wide and restless. The valley, once green and peaceful, now looked different. Smoke rose from patches of broken trees, and the earth seemed to have been torn apart in long lines. A silence hung over the land, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Then, without warning, a shadow passed over the city. People gasped and pointed upward. High above the walls, something vast moved across the sky. Its wings stretched wide, each beat sending waves of wind that shook rooftops and rattled windows. The creature's body glimmered like black stone, and its eyes burned with a red glow. It let out a roar that made the wall shake, and the ground trembled beneath the people's feet. Panic broke out at once. Mothers grabbed their children, traders abandoned their stalls, and farmers ran through the gates back into the city. The guards raised their spears, but fear showed in their faces. Never before had they seen anything like this. Beast. Aaron stared up, remembering the carvings in the temple. This was no dream. This was the same winged monster etched into stone by the ancestors. It circled the city once, its shadow stretching over all of Leora, then swooped down. With a single strike of its claws, it tore through the outer wall as if the stone were nothing but clay. Dust and rock filled the air. Screams echoed across the streets. People rushed in every direction, unsure where to hide. Mira pulled Aaron by the arm, and the two hurried toward the square where the temple stood. She shouted over the noise. The ancestors left warnings and weapons. We must look for them. Another roar split the sky, and this time, two more beasts appeared from behind the hills. One crawled across the valley on four massive legs. its tail swinging like a heavy chain, crushing everything in its path. The other glided low, its wings cutting through the trees, sending broken branches flying into the river. The earth itself seemed to shake as the creatures moved closer. The guards fought bravely. They threw spears and arrows, but the weapons broke against the scales of the beasts. Fire burst from the jaws of the flying creature, striking houses and setting rooftops in flames. Smoke spread quickly, and the air filled with the smell of burning wood. People coughed and stumbled as they tried to flee. Aaron and Mira pushed through the frightened crowd. They reached the temple, its ancient doors still standing strong. Inside, the carvings seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if the stone itself was remembering what had happened before. Mira pressed her hand against the wall, whispering, "They knew this day would come again." Behind them, the city shook as another strike from the beasts crashed into the walls. The sound of falling stone filled the air. From outside, the cries of men and women grew louder. Aaron clenched his fists. He wanted to fight, but with what? Their simple weapons were useless against such monsters. Then, as the ground rumbled beneath their feet, a part of the temple floor cracked. Dust rose as a hidden chamber revealed itself. A stairway led downward, lit faintly by a soft glow. Aaron and Myra looked at each other, fear mixing with hope. Without waiting, they stepped inside. The chamber was filled with strange objects. Rods of metal, sharp but light, lined the walls. Crystals of blue and green pulsed faintly, as though alive. On the stone floor lay shields unlike any they had seen, smooth and shining, as if made from the same scales as the beasts. The writings of the ancestors covered the walls, symbols warning of great battles between man and creature. Myra picked up one of the rods. It felt warm in her hand, and when she pressed a symbol carved on its side, light shot out from the tip. The glow cut across the dark chamber, strong and steady. Aaron picked up a shield, surprised by its strength despite its lightness. These were not tools of peace. These were weapons of war, left behind for the day the beasts returned. Above them, the roars grew louder. The beasts were tearing deeper into the city, and the cries of people filled the air. Aaron lifted the shield and said firmly, "We cannot run. The ancestors left these for us to stand and fight." Mira nodded, her eyes shining with both fear and courage. They stepped back into the square. The smoke was thick, but through it, they saw one of the beasts crashing through the marketplace, scattering stone and wood. Its wings spread wide, blocking the sun, while its tail smashed into the walls again and again. People were trapped, cornered by fire and falling rock. Myra lifted the glowing rod and pointed it at the beast. A beam of light burst forth, striking its side. The creature let out a furious roar and staggered, surprised for the first time. The people of Leora gasped, turning their eyes toward the siblings. For the first time, they saw hope. The attack had begun, but so had the fight for survival. The square of Leora filled with smoke and fear. Flames climbed from broken houses, and the cries of people echoed through every street. The great beast roared in pain where Myra's beam of light had struck it, and for a moment, its wings faltered. That small moment gave the people a breath of hope, but it also drew the attention of the other creatures. Two more beasts turned their glowing eyes toward the temple, where Aaron and Mira now stood with the strange relics of the ancestors. The ground shook as one of the monsters stepped closer, its claws sinking deep into the stone street. The people ran in all directions, seeking shelter, but Aaron did not move back. He held the shining shield tightly and stood beside his sister. His voice was steady even as fear ran through him. "The ancestors left these for us. We must learn how to use them." Mira nodded, her hand shaking as she held the glowing rod. The light still burned at its tip, humming softly as if alive. She remembered the carvings in the hidden chamber, the shapes of people holding these same rods and driving the beasts. Back, the ancestors had known this day would come, and they had left their knowledge hidden below the temple. But there had been no time to study the writings, no time to understand fully. They would have to trust their hands and their courage. The flying beast turned sharply, fire glowing in its throat. It opened its jaws and sent a wave of flame toward the square. Aaron raised the shield instinctively. A dome of light spread out, blocking the fire. The flames crashed against it like water against stone, lighting the square with a golden glow. The people gasped as they watched the shield hold strong. Aaron's arms trembled from the force, but the shield did not break. When the flames ended, he lowered it, his breath heavy, but his heart stronger. The people began to whisper among themselves. They saw now that the relics were not simple objects. They were weapons that could match the beasts. Some villagers began to gather near the siblings instead of fleeing, their fears slowly turning into courage. But the beasts were not finished. The winged one roared and swept low, smashing the ground with its claws. The square cracked, stones flying in every direction. Mira steadied her hand and aimed the glowing rod again. Another beam of light shot out, striking the beast in the chest. This time, the creature howled in fury and stumbled backward. The air shook with its roar, and black smoke rose where the light had touched its scales. Aaron looked at Mira with wide eyes. "It can hurt them," he said firmly. "The ancestors gave us the key." Still, there was little time to celebrate. More of the creatures moved through the valley. Their shapes appeared like shadows against the burning horizon. The city would not survive if only two siblings carried the fight. Humanity needed more than just courage. It needed the full wisdom of the ancestors. Aaron and Myra returned quickly to the chamber beneath the temple. They carried torches to see better, for the glow of the crystals alone was faint. The walls were covered with carvings, far more detailed than those above. Long lines of figures showed how the ancestors had fought, how they had built weapons powered by light itself. There were instructions, simple yet powerful. Symbols showed how the crystals were to be placed into rods and shields, how the energy within them could be awakened by human hands. Mira studied them closely, her eyes moving quickly over the shapes. "These are not just tools," she said, softly. "They are part of us. The ancestors made them so anyone could use them, not just the strong. That is why they left them behind. They trusted their children to rise again if the beasts returned. They gathered what they could carry." Aaron lifted several shields, handing them to the men who had followed them into the chamber. Myra passed rods to the women, showing them how to press the symbols until light filled the room. At first, fear filled the eyes of the villagers, but when the rods hummed and glowed, their fear turned into wonder. The weapons felt alive in their hands, ready to be used. Dot above the chamber, the city continued to shake. The beasts roared, tearing down towers and scattering stone like dust. Yet for the first time, humans no longer ran only to hide. They returned to the square, holding the weapons of their ancestors. Light beams shot into the smoke, striking the beasts again and again. Shields of glowing energy blocked fire and claw. The tide of fear began to shift. Aaron led a small group into the marketplace, his shield glowing like the sun. Mira followed with others, teaching them quickly how to aim the rods. The people shouted in unity, their voices rising louder than their fear. The beasts snarled, but their roars no longer sounded as unstoppable as before. For every strike of their claws, humans answered with beams of light. Still, Aaron knew this was only the beginning. These few weapons would not be enough to stop all. The creatures, they needed more. Somewhere, hidden deeper in the temple, or perhaps in other cities, the ancestors had surely left greater knowledge. This first chamber was only a beginning. As the night fell, the flames in the city still burned, but so did the light of human courage. The people of Liara had discovered the hidden knowledge of their ancestors, and with it, they had found more than weapons. They had found belief in themselves. The beasts had attacked, but humanity was no longer helpless. The ancestors had spoken through stone and crystal, and their children had answered. The city of Liara was scarred by fire and broken stone, yet it still stood. The first night of the attack had shaken every heart, but it had also awakened something the people thought was long lost. With the ancient weapons in their hands, they realized they were not powerless. They could stand against the beast. Aaron and Mira moved through the streets as dawn came. Smoke still rose from houses, and the cries of wounded men and women carried across the air. Yet, for every sound of pain, there was also the sound of hammers striking, wood being lifted, and walls being repaired. The people were not giving up. They were gathering, building, and preparing. At the temple square, groups trained under the morning sun. Men, women, and even the older youths stood in lines, each holding a glowing rod or shield. Mira showed them how to press the symbols to awaken the crystals, how to aim carefully, and how to time their strikes together. The light beams looked like arrows of the sun, and when fired in unity, they struck with great force. Aaron, meanwhile, taught them how to defend. With his shield, he showed how to stand in formation, how to block fire and claws, and how to protect one another. At first, the people struggled. The beams missed their targets, and the shields trembled under the weight of the practice strikes. But slowly, their courage grew. They learned to trust the weapons, and more importantly, to trust each other. By midday, when a beast circled overhead, the people did not scatter. Instead, they raised their shields and rods together. Dozens of beams shot upward, and the creature cried out before fleeing back into the clouds. For the first time, the people of Liara cheered instead of weeping. The news spread quickly across the land. Messengers left the city, carrying word to nearby villages that the ancient weapons had been found and that humans could fight back. Survivors from smaller towns began to arrive at Liara, bringing their families, their strength, and their will to resist. What had been one city's desperate fight was now becoming a gathering of many people. In the evenings, around fires, the elders spoke with trembling voices. They admitted that the carvings in the temple had been true all along. The beasts were not symbols but real enemies, enemies the ancestors had once faced. Aaron listened carefully, asking questions about old songs and forgotten tales. Some of the elders remembered stories from their own grandparents, stories of light weapons and crystal power. These half-forgotten words now gave clues about how the ancestors had survived. Myra recorded the knowledge, drawing maps and marks, so it would not be forgotten again. She reminded the people that memory itself was a weapon. The ancestors gave us more than tools, she told them. They gave us their story, and if we keep it alive, we will always have the strength to rise. The days that followed were filled with both fear and courage. The beasts did not stop their attacks. They returned again and again, testing the strength of the humans. Sometimes, a single creature would swoop low, scattering fire across the fields. Other times, groups of them moved through the valley, shaking the earth with their steps. Yet, each time, the humans stood stronger. One night, 3 winged beasts attacked together, circling above the walls and striking with fire. But instead of falling into chaos, the people formed ranks. Aaron led a line of shield bearers, their glowing domes protecting those behind. Mira gave the signal, and dozens of rods lit the sky with beams of light. The battle lasted for hours, but in the end, one of the creatures fell into the river, its body sinking with a thunderous crash. The people cheered so loudly that even the hills seemed to echo their voices. This victory changed everything. No longer did the people speak only of fear. They began to speak of winning. Children sang songs about the light of the ancestors. Young men and women volunteered to train, their eyes burning with determination. Farmers who once held only plows now carried rods that shone like the sun. Traders who once counted coins now counted shields, passing them out with pride. Aaron and Mira knew the fight was far from over. The beasts were many, and the land beyond the valley was still unknown. Yet they also knew something greater had begun. Humanity was rising, not as scattered groups, but as one people. Their voices, their courage, and their light were spreading. Evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Aaron stood on the wall and watched the horizon. He saw distant fires glowing where the beasts still moved. But instead of fear, he felt resolve. Mira joined him, carrying a map she had drawn. On it, she marked where villages had sent help and where survivors were gathering. "The beasts are strong," she said softly, "but they are not endless. The ancestors proved it once, and now we will prove it again." Aaron placed a hand on the shield by his side. Its glow was faint in the fading light, but it was steady. He turned to his sister and replied, "This is no longer only about surviving. This is about showing the beasts that humanity will not fall." Below them, the city prepared once more. Fires lit the night, weapons glowed in the hands of the people, and voices rose in songs of courage. The rising resistance was no longer a dream. It was alive, and it was ready. The valley that once looked calm and green was no longer the same. Black smoke curled from broken forests, rivers carried ash on their surface, and the sound of roars echoed almost every night. The people of Leora had fought bravely, but they knew something greater was coming. The beasts were gathering in numbers larger than before. The attacks on the city were no longer single strikes. They were tests, waiting for the moment to crush humanity fully. The council, once doubtful, now stood beside Aaron and Mira. Leaders admitted their mistakes, and together they prepared every person for the battle they all knew was near. Word spread beyond Leora, and more survivors arrived daily. Villages burned by the beasts sent their strongest men and women. Families carried with them fragments of stories, memories of the ancestors, and sometimes even forgotten relics buried deep in the earth. Each new arrival added strength and hope. The temple chamber became the heart of this resistance. More weapons were uncovered, more crystals fitted into rods, and shields were strengthened. Mira worked day and night to study the carvings on the walls. She discovered that when several crystals were placed together, the rods could burn even brighter, their beams strong enough to pierce the thickest scales. Aaron trained the warriors, showing them how to fight as one body. He reminded them that fear alone could not defeat beasts, but unity could. When the sun rose on the seventh day, after the first great attack, the earth itself gave warning. The ground trembled before the eyes of the people, and from the far hills came the thunder of many feet. Smoke rose like a wall, and out of it, shadows appeared, winged shapes, crawling giants, and towering forms with claws sharp enough to tear stone. The beasts were no longer testing. They were coming with all their strength. The city wall shook as horns blew across Leora. Men and women rushed to their stations. Shields lit up in golden domes and rods burned with light, ready for fire. Children and the old were sent to the deepest parts of the temple, where stone would protect them. On the wall, Aaron lifted his shield, the glow spreading out to those beside him. Mira stood in the square below, directing groups of fighters and healers, her voice steady despite the storm that was about to fall. Then the beast struck. A winged monster dived first, its roar breaking the air. Fire poured from its mouth, but dozens of shields rose together, blocking the flames. Behind the walls, rods fired upward, beams slicing through the smoke and striking the creature's side. It howled in rage and pulled back, but another took its place at once, claws crashing against the stone. The city trembled as towers broke and dust filled the streets. The people fought without retreat. Groups moved in formations, shields covering those with rods firing together in bursts of light. When one fighter grew weak, another stepped in. The beasts expected easy prey, but they met a wall of human courage. Aaron's squad stood at the main gate, where a crawling beast with a tail like a hammer tried to break through. Each strike shook the ground, but Aaron's shield held firm, glowing brighter with every hit. He shouted for the others to aim, and beams of light burned into the creature's eyes. With a roar, it staggered backward, blinded and furious. In the square, Mira guided fighters against smaller winged beasts that swooped low to snatch people. She shouted for the groups to wait, then gave the signal. A storm of light beams rose together, striking one beast in the chest. It fell, crashing into the marketplace and sending up clouds of dust. The people shouted with victory, their fear turning into fire in their hearts. But the battle did not end quickly. More beasts poured from the smoke, each one different, each one strong. The city burned in many places, and the night turned red with flames. Yet for every building that fell, the humans fought harder. They had no choice. This was no longer only a battle for Leora, it was a battle for all of humanity. Hours passed, and still the fight raged. Aaron's arms ached, but he kept his shield high. Myra's voice grew hoarse, but she did not stop giving orders. The people stood together, their voices shouting louder than the roars of the beasts. Slowly, something began to change. The monsters, who once looked unstoppable, began to fall back. The beams of light burned holes in their wings, cracked their scales, and forced them to retreat. At last, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the largest of the winged beasts gave a final roar. It rose into the sky, its body scorched and wounded, and the others followed. The ground shook as the remaining crawling giants pulled back into the smoking hills. Silence slowly fell, broken only by the crackle of fire and the heavy breaths of the survivors. The people of Leora stood on broken streets, their faces covered in ash, their arms heavy with exhaustion. Yet in their eyes burned the fire of victory. Against the storm, they had held. The great battle had not destroyed them. It had proven what they were. Aaron lowered his shield and looked at Myra. She was tired, her hands shaking, but her eyes shone with pride. "The ancestors were right," she said softly. "We are stronger than we believe." Aaron nodded, his voice steady. "This is only the beginning. They will come again, but so will we. And we will stand." The great battle of Leora was not the end. It was the mark of a new chapter, one where humanity would rise beyond fear and carry the light of their ancestors into the days ahead. The sun rose slowly over Leora, casting its first light across broken walls and blackened streets. Smoke drifted upward, carrying the smell of fire and dust. Yet, in the silence that followed the great battle, there was also peace. For the first time in many days, no roars echoed across the valley. The beasts had withdrawn into the far hills, leaving behind only their shadows. The people of Leora gathered in the main square, where fires still smoldered and the stone floor was cracked from claws and strikes. Faces were weary, clothes torn, but eyes shone with something new. They had survived. What many once thought impossible had been done. Aaron stood before them, his shield scarred but still glowing faintly. Beside him, Mira held the rod with its crystal, the light flickering softly like a living flame. Together they faced the crowd. The elders of the council stepped forward, their voices humbled. They spoke of mistakes, of how doubt had blinded them and how bravery had saved them. Yet the people were not angry. They understood now that survival came not from one leader or one decision, but from the unity of all. Myra's voice carried through the square, steady despite her exhaustion. The battle is not the end. The beasts will return. But so will we. We will not run. We will not bend. We will carry the strength of our ancestors forward. Her words spread through the crowd, filling hearts with pride. Mothers held their children close, and fathers lifted their heads high. Young men and women who had never held a weapon before now stood taller, knowing they had played a part in protecting their people. In the days that followed, the work of rebuilding began. Families cleared the streets, raised new shelters, and repaired walls. The temple became a place not only of memory but of action. The carvings were studied carefully, and more relics were uncovered beneath stone floors. Old symbols told of other hidden places across the land, places where weapons and knowledge might still be waiting. Aaron led groups beyond the valley to scout and to seek survivors. Some journeys returned with people who had been hiding in forests or caves. Others brought back stories of distant villages destroyed by the beasts. Everywhere they went, people listened when they spoke of Leora. They told how humans had stood together and fought, how shields of light had held against fire, and how unity had broken the strength of monsters. These stories spread like wind, carrying hope to places that had long forgotten courage. Myra continued to guide the people inside the city. She worked with the elders to form schools where children learned not only farming and crafts but also the history of the ancestors. She reminded them that memory was as much a weapon as any blade or beam of light. If people remembered who they were, they would never again be easy prey. Weeks turned into months, and the valley slowly changed. New crops were planted in the soil where fire had burned. Watchtowers rose on the hills, their tops glowing with crystals to warn of any movement from the beasts. Roads were built to connect Leora with other groups of survivors. For the first time, humanity was not hiding. It was spreading its hands outward, reaching across the land. But the threat was never forgotten. Scouts returned often with signs of beast gathering again. Shadows moved beyond the mountains, and strange roars sometimes carried on the wind. Yet instead of fear, these warnings only sharpened the people's resolve. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Aaron and Mira stood on the city wall. Below them, children laughed as they played among the repaired streets. Families lit small fires for warmth, their voices carrying songs of victory and remembrance. Aaron looked out at the horizon, his jaw firm. "Do you think they will return soon?" he asked. Myra's eyes followed the fading light. "Yes," she said softly. "But when they come, they will not find the same prey they once hunted. They will find a people who remember, a people who fight." Aaron nodded, his hand resting on the shield by his side. "Then we are ready." The wind carried the sound of drums from the square below, where a new tradition had begun. Every seventh night, the people gathered to honor the ancestors. They sang not only of the past but of the present, of their own courage. Children learned the names of those who had fallen in the battle, and their memories were carried like flames into the next generation. The legacy of the ancestors was no longer hidden in carvings or relics. It lived in the hearts of the people. It burned in every shield raised high, in every beam of light cast against darkness, and in every voice that shouted for unity. And though the beasts would return, as they always had, the people of Leora would no longer cower. They had become the storm that would rise again and again, until the world itself remembered that humanity was not weak, not forgotten, but unbreakable. As night fell, stars lit the sky, brighter than they had seemed in many years. Myra looked upward, her voice quiet but strong. "They watch us still," she said, meaning the ancestors, "and we will not let them down." Aaron placed his hand over his heart, and for a moment, The city below seemed to glow with the same light that lived inside the people. A light that no beast, no shadow, and no fear could ever take away. The story of survival had become a story of strength. The panic of the ancestors had become the power of their children. Humanity, once hunted, was now the hunter of hope. And the future belonged to them.